terror of around 20 senior commanders, the assassination of key nuclear scientists, and widespread attacks on military sites. The initial phase of Israel's attacks against Iran kicked off with a complete surprise. Not only were top-tier Iranian military commanders targeted, but most of their successors, who would have led any potential retaliatory operations, were also assassinated. Shortly after, it seemed the second phase of Israel's plan was on the verge of beginning.
This is your opportunity to stand up,
stirring up a segment of protesting Iranians to take to the streets. But contrary to predictions, just 17 hours after Israel's attacks, Iran began its response with a massive missile and drone strike. The scope of this conflict progressively widened. It even reached a point where the U.S. directly entered the attacks against Iran, and Iran responded by striking American base in Qatar. But precisely at the moment the war could have escalated much further, a ceasefire was suddenly declared after 12 days. Many believe this ceasefire is merely a short break between the first and second rounds of the war, and that the flames of conflict will soon reignite. But in this first round, who can be considered the winner? This wasn't Israel's first large-scale surprise attack. 58 years ago, Israel launched a major surprise operation against Egypt. This conflict began with a surprise aerial attack by Israel on Egyptian airbases on the morning of June 5, 1967. This quickly paralyzed the Egyptian Air Force and secured complete air superiority for Israel. The Israeli Air Force sent almost all of its 200 active fighter jets, launching a surprise attack on Egyptian military airports within hours. In this unprecedented assault, 338 Egyptian warplanes, including Soviet-made MiG fighters and Tupolev bombers, along with runways and over 100 Egyptian pilots, were destroyed on the ground before Egypt could respond adequately. A significant number of Egyptian military radars and anti-aircraft systems were also obliterated. With this catastrophe unfolding for Egypt, Syria, and Jordan entered the conflict in its defense. However, the initial blow was so heavy that in subsequent battles, the Egyptian army eventually retreated extensively from the Sinai Peninsula all the way to beyond the Suez Canal. Meanwhile, the Israeli army shifted the battlefield to the Golan Heights and the west bank of the Jordan River, which were the headquarters of Jordanian and Syrian forces. They defeated them, occupying the Golan Heights and the Sheba farms. Perhaps this experience became the foundation for many of Israel's subsequent plans, something that also manifested in the surprise Grim Reaper operation against Hezbollah forces in Lebanon. But this time, although the initial blow was very heavy, it was met with a different reaction from Iran. Gradually, Iran was able to inflict significant damage on Israel. For instance, on the first day, only about 10% of Iran's missiles hit their targets. But by the last day of the war, this statistic had reached approximately 60%. Israel had several major goals in this war: the destruction of Iran's nuclear program, regime change in Iran, the downfall of the Islamic Republic, and a significant blow to Iran's missile program and military assets. On the other hand, following Israel's attacks, Iran sought to inflict irreparable damage on Israel and establish full deterrence to prevent any further attacks. But how successful were both sides in achieving these objectives? Israel was able to inflict serious damage on several Iranian atomic sites, including 2 sites in Natanz and Isfahan and Kandab. Later, with the U.S. involvement, the underground Fordow facility was also added to the list of attack targets, although there's much ambiguity about the success or failure of the attack on Fordow. Regarding other components of the nuclear program, Israel succeeded in assassinating some of Iran's most prominent nuclear scientists. However, Given the long history of Iran's nuclear program and its extensive scope, it seems Israel is still far from delivering a serious blow to the entire network of influential Iranian scientists in this field. Furthermore, Israel managed to inflict heavy damage on Iran's radar and air defense systems, conducting widespread aerial attacks, even over the Iranian capital. They were also able to attack Iran's missile sites, but most of these attacks were focused on the entrances and exits of Iranian missile cities and visible launchers. There's no documented evidence of serious damage to Iran's missile stockpiles, but Israel's most important goal was regime change in Iran. To achieve this goal, in addition to assassinating commanders and attacking government centers, Israel undertook another audaciously bold action, an attempt to simultaneously assassinate President Pezeshkian, the Speaker of Parliament and the head of the judiciary of Iran. This attempt successfully struck their meeting location in Chitgar, Tehran, but they narrowly managed to leave the place through emergency routes. However, despite Israel's predictions, these attacks not only failed to create an opening for government opponents to take to the streets, but Iran, which in recent years had faced a series of protests and divisions, experienced widespread unity among various factions and parties against the foreign attacks, collectively declaring their steadfastness. The high number of civilian casualties among Iranians in these attacks had a significant impact on this sentiment. On the other hand, Iran, through continuous missile attacks that penetrated multiple layers of Israel's allies' defenses, and subsequently Israel's own defenses, inflicted significant damage on Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other Israeli cities, destroying many important centers.
You can see just how powerful these explosions were, those buildings.
These attacks did not cease even after the U.S. entered the battle. In response to the U.S. attack on nuclear sites, Iran even struck American bases in Qatar. The increasing quality of Iran's attacks in the final days, with the use of more advanced and destructive missiles, and on the other hand, Israel's mastery of Iranian skies and intelligence superiority, effectively put both sides in a paradoxical situation. They had both the best opportunity to inflict serious blows on the opponent and were simultaneously very vulnerable to the opponent's attacks. This issue led both sides to accept a ceasefire after 12 days, following a U.S. proposal. On one hand, Iran, a country that has been under decades of sanctions and economic pressure, whose allies like China and Russia did not play effective roles in the war on its behalf, and some of its allies were seriously hit after October 7th, was able to demonstrate its military and armaments power. It challenged the notion that victory against Israel in the region was impossible and garnered significant popular support in the region and worldwide. On the other hand, Israel was able to showcase its superior intelligence and technological capabilities. Although the war has currently paused, all signs indicate that both sides are trying to address their weaknesses from the first round, rapidly preparing themselves for a second, potentially broader round of conflict.